Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We are here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share our mission and our vision of education with your friends. We are very, very grateful. And in this last episode, this last summer edition of Heightscast, I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast Mr. Michael Moynihan,
Hello,
head
Rich.
of the Heights Upper School. Welcome, Michael. And Mr. Austin Hatch, who is the head of the Jackson Scholars Program, freshman core teacher, and in addition, one of the OGs, the original architects of the History of Western Thought class, and kind of a curriculum in itself. So welcome, Austin.
Thank you, Rich.
And so we're going to talk about, sometimes we talk about formation and kind of this question of how to help young men become fully what they're made to be. Sometimes we talk about broader curricular questions, things like English or math, how to teach things. Sometimes we talk about broader social movements that are affecting education and culture. I think today we're going to talk about all of those things at the same time, interestingly, but within the context of a book that our boys have been reading now as part of the History of Western Thought class. The book is Strange New World by Carl Trueman. And so I've seen this under arms in the hallways here at the Heights, and I've just been curious about what the book is. It's always read by our seniors. And so I think today we're going to talk about all those things in a way, the concept of formation, right? Something outside of ourselves in a way that we need to build ourselves towards. Our curriculum, this History of Western Thought, certainly cultural movements that affect our boys. All of those, again, within the context of this book. And perhaps it's just a helpful data point for people. Perhaps some people in some schools might want to actually take a closer look. So thanks for being a part of the conversation, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, totally. And so again, Strange New World by Carl Trueman. We read this book with our seniors in HOWT, the
History of Western Thought
acronym for the History of Western Thought. Exactly. Michael, maybe you can guide us through just a quick history of how the class was founded and just what is the class and then where it came from and then how this particular book fits in.
Sure. So it's something that has its beginnings going back a few decades. And it had its beginnings with many conversations among faculty here at the Heights, also talking with alumni. And the vision of the course that we were talking about originally, before it even was launched, was, wouldn't it be great if the seniors left the Heights with sort of an understanding of the whole panorama of the Western intellectual tradition, all the way going back from the ancient Greeks up till the present. If there was a class, a history, if you will, of Western thought where they read primary source documents, they read Plato and Aristotle, and then they read all the way from the tradition, all the way up to present times, so that they went into college with an overall landscape in their mind, and that this would be a good thing in and of itself. But also, we talked about how that would help them to be able to place a lot of the different ideas that are coming at them their freshman, sophomore, junior year in college, senior year as well, place them in a certain context that they've already had while they're here at the Heights. And the more we talked about it, the more we became convinced that this was definitely the right way to go, that we needed to launch this class. And practically speaking, when we finally decided to pull the trigger, if you will, and launch the class, we essentially forced it in as the required history class for all seniors at the Heights. Now, prior to this, the seniors had the opportunity to choose their history class. They would choose different electives, a lot of times AP classes, other history class options that we had. And when we explained to the senior class that we're convinced this is a really good thing and we're going to do it next year, and I remember they came into my office with a petition signed by almost the entire class requesting that, they were very polite about it. They said, would you please offer this History of Western Thought class as an optional class the first year just to see how it goes before making it required for everyone. The response that we gave them is, you guys just have to trust us on this. Like, we're convinced this is something that's really important and really good. And I understand that you've been imagining taking these other classes your senior year, but we're convinced that this is good. And in the meantime, after they left the office and we all said this and we talked among ourselves, we're like, we hope this is really good. We hope this is exactly what they really do need, and our ideas and our conversations with other faculty and alumni were actually accurate. But we were very edified after a few weeks into the school year. We started getting some really good reports from the students. There was obviously something about this class and this curriculum which was resonating strongly with them. And many of them ended up telling us, thank you for doing this. This is my favorite class. This was really great. So it was an overwhelming skeptical, but then turned positive response on the part of the boys.
It's awesome. Yeah, I think there's two kind of class-wide petitions that I'm aware of. One was maybe not the whole class, but sort of asking that this be an optional course. The other one, wasn't there a year where we were forecast to have like freezing temperatures and rain and monsoons, and so the idea was offered that maybe we should reschedule the junior senior flag football tournament, and I think the whole class kind of came out en masse and requested it not be changed.
Yes, that's true. That did happen, and we told them, all right, we're willing to allow you to play in the rain and freezing rain for your flag football tournament as long as you don't complain.
Yeah.
And they readily agreed to that.
Yeah, no complaints. Good. And then how does this book then, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's an interesting conversation that happens often, and importantly so, about how to treat some of these, some of the modern thinkers that this book in particular discusses. Folks like Descartes, but then you move forward from here and you get, Marx and Sartre, Nietzsche, and just Simone de Beauvoir, like a lot of really interesting, to say the least, thinkers. And there's really a question of like, okay, Plato cautions us against going with philosophy to the young a bit too early, and yet these guys are all going to get hit with it real hard, many of them at the next level in university. So how do we engage these thinkers? I think this book was perhaps a part of that solution, but yeah, how did this book work its way into the HOWT curriculum?
Sure. So when we originally launched the HOWT class, the vision was that we wanted to make sure that we gave them a sense of modern thought, and that was hard for us to do. We would do a really great job having them read Plato and Aristotle and even at times Cicero and Seneca, Augustine, Aquinas, and they were really delving into the riches of our tradition and having a great experience doing that. We did do Descartes' Discourse on Method, and that helped to give them some idea of what it was like to shift to the subject that Descartes represents. And then, there was so many other thinkers that were like, how do we cover Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud? I mean, all these thinkers that are very influential and have a lot of impact on our current cultural moment, but we really didn't know how we were going to get those into the class. So we picked a couple other works from the modern period. I think we had Newman's Idea of a University, a wonderful text. And we added Pope Benedict's Regensburg Address, which, another fantastic text. Both texts still have a place in the course. But we admittedly didn't do as great of a job as we would have liked throughout the main thrust of modern thought. So we were really looking for a book that would present these modern thinkers in a concise and accurate way and help to explain how they were influential, influencing our current cultural moment. And Carl Trueman, he ended up writing, first before he wrote Strange New World, he wrote a much longer book called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And it is kind of a more in-depth and scholarly version of Strange New World. And his friend Ryan Anderson reached out to him and said, Carl, you did a great service by writing this book, but the only problem is very few people are going to read it. You need to write something that's shorter and is more concise and really explains these thinkers better for somebody who doesn't have enough time to read this very scholarly tome. And so Carl Trueman took that advice very seriously and wrote Strange New World, and we found it to be a good fit to help to explain these moderns to the students, and I think in a way that resonates with them. But I know Austin could say more about that.
Yeah, no, perfect. And Austin, I'd love to hear just maybe I was going to say back of the napkin, maybe back of the book description of what in general is this book about, and how would you summarize it, and how does it kind of tie into not just the previous material of HOWT, but just also you, in addition to teaching the seniors and working with the guys who are the Jackson Scholars, who's kind of our by invitation only senior thesis program for listeners outside the community. But you also teach the freshmen, so you get them in the beginning when they're just starting out in the high school, and then so you see the whole kind of trajectory of their progression. But what is in just kind of the 10,000 foot view, what is this book, and then how does it tie into just the broader curriculum?
Well, just in terms of how it first comes into HOWT, it's kind of an exception to the rule in HOWT, because History of Western Thought is a primary source discussion kind of course. So it's Plato's Republic, it's Plato's Phaedo, it's most of Aristotle's Ethics, it's Cicero's De Officiis, Book 1, and then Augustine's Confessions, the first 10 books or so, and then excerpts from Thomas's Summa, and Thomas More's Book 1 of Utopia. Descartes' Discourse on Method was there at the beginning, and then took a brief hiatus and then returned. So Descartes back in the course. And then, as Michael mentioned, Newman's Idea of a University, excerpts from that, and then the Regensburg Address from Pope Benedict. And then we return to Plato's Apologies. So this is the only text that's a secondary text where we've got an author giving us a synopsis of other authors. And so it fits in two regards. I think it serves us in that it allows us to do more in less time. We use the different sections of HOWT may use more or less of it. I think all of us use the first 5 chapters, not necessarily the entire book. And it takes us from Descartes, where we've just finished the Discourse on Method directly with the guys, through a thumbnail sketch of Rousseau, and then the Romantic poets, which the guys are familiar with from their literature classes, but also from the freshman core class. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is kind of the representative Romantic work, along with Wordsworth and Coleridge and Shelley. They've encountered those guys directly before reading about the Romantics in this book, and then into Kant and Hegel and Marx and Nietzsche, and then some others. But so that's where it fits. It's kind of a second semester text. It's the exception to the primary source kind of rule. So it allows us to do more in less time, and it also gives us a chance to discuss these very influential and important thinkers with students who maybe, generally, they're not ready for them directly. Yeah. They're all very skilled, very influential. Just a little anecdote: as a St. John's College graduate student, I remember reading Aristotle. It's kind of a HOWT graduate program, and just nodding my head, thinking, "Yeah, oh man, I hadn't thought of that." Yeah, and then just one book after another, the great books of the West, but doing the same thing with the Communist Manifesto. Another reader might have said, "This is absurd."
Yeah.
Right. But with my lack of formation at the time, I was just reading it like, "Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of that." So you don't want to be nodding your head when you've missed a premise early in an argument, earlier in a text, or an assumption early in a text with Marx or with Nietzsche, and agreeing with later things that are going to lead you to terribly erroneous places, which these thinkers can get you there. So there's a reason, I think, in addition to time management, to also treat of these sophisticated writers with a friend like Carl Trueman, who's done the work of condensing it for you and identifying some essential points to help you understand where we are and where we came from, but without just taking a walk through the mall and seeing what you can find, because there's a lot of things you don't want.
And that really speaks to really two goals that we have for this History of Western Thought class. One is that the boys grow in wisdom, really, that and Aristotle and many of those other authors can be very helpful for that goal. But the second goal being that they grow in an understanding of the world around them. So they're better able to kind of understand a little bit what makes modern culture tick, if you will. And it's in that second category that Strange New World is really helpful for.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the book is written within this context of, it's written as, seems to me, as an attempt to explain the intellectual and then some of the other cultural background of many of the modern ideologies that we see operating today. And so it is interesting, but it's not limited just, I don't think, to those specific ideologies. In the Atlantic magazine for this September, it's interesting. There's a piece on euthanasia in Canada, and the writer is just pointing out how quickly this has spread in the country, to the point now where 1 in 20 deaths in Canada, according to this author in the Atlantic magazine, is from euthanasia, which is super interesting, and some other things as
concerning.
Well. And concerning, yeah. But the last sentence of the introductory section is, has Canada itself gotten what it wanted? 9 years after the legalization of assisted death, Canada's leaders seem to regard this from a strange, almost anthropological remove, as if the future of euthanasia is no more within their control than the laws of physics, as if continued expansion is not a reality the government is choosing so much as conceding. And this is where it was interesting in light of this book by Trueman. This is the story of an ideology in motion, of what happens when a nation enshrines a right before reckoning the totality of its logic. And so it struck me that this is not the book, the particular context that this book is written in is not the only one where I think its explanations of modern thinkers are going to be helpful. And so I think it's great that those first 5 chapters in particular are encountered by our students. Austin, having taught the book, can you give us what are some of the big themes that you see in this particular work? Because he talks about Marx and Hegel, he talks about Rousseau, gets some special treatment in there, but he batches them into these kind of helpful categories, I suppose. Can you share some of those categories with us, and just, again, back of the napkin, what's going on here?
So as Michael mentioned, it starts with, or Carl starts with the turn to the subject, or the inward turn from Descartes, and then from there groups the Romantics and Rousseau. And you've got a beautiful romantic image right behind you.
That's right.
Digitally reproduced.
Yeah, they're just trying to get in touch with nature so they can be fully who they are.
Exactly. And so that grouping, this kind of, and again, it echoes what Mary Shelley's exploring in Frankenstein from freshman year. But yeah, getting in touch with nature, retuning one's feelings and emotions, and kind of seeing with Rousseau that the self is good, and that culture can get in the way. And we can all agree with that. When the culture communicates an injustice, then there is this interior-exterior strife. But it's what Trueman narrates is when the culture thinks it's communicating a justice, and the interior is out of tune, which is often the case 7 times a day for most of us, then just trying to live in accordance with one's feelings gets us away from justice and away from happiness instead of in tune with it. So, and the Romantics so that it makes sense to group Rousseau and the Romantics there, and he gives us Trueman gives us an episode from Rousseau's Confessions, and by this time the boys have read most of Augustine's Confessions and thought about his meditation on evil as he recalls stealing pears and throwing them to the swine, and just thinking about what it is that prompts his theft. What is that, if anything? Thinking about sin as evil, as non-being rather than a thing. So it's a very interesting passage to go through, and the classicists can all do it in Latin, but we just do it in English. But Rousseau has a similar theft that he thinks about, but it's a different meditation. So he's stealing asparagus for this poor man who asks him to, so that he could sell the asparagus, which he steals from his mother, to give the man so that he can get something to eat. So he's kind of acting out of good intentions, but then as he meditates on it, it's because he wants to be liked by the guy. He gives into flattery. And anyway, so there's interesting dialogue between the later thinkers and the early thinkers, even if the later thinkers sometimes erase the mention, right? So at least as Trueman presents it, Rousseau isn't talking about Augustine, even though he's obviously stolen, so to speak, from Augustine. And similarly, Descartes will do that as well, right? He's kind of at the beginning sets aside all of his learning and then does some things that are very much Plato's tools used in a different way. So that's one of the great things about history of Western thought, is that you're accumulating these experiences of reading these different authors, and then you see them in dialogue with each other, and then the boys in dialogue as well. Some of the guys love this book. It's their favorite book. It's much more set in it's set in a current moment that they can appeal to. Others don't like it, so they vary in how they respond to it. But that was just the first grouping. You asked me about others. So then he also pairs Marx with Nietzsche, seeing Marx as the materialist turnover of Hegel. So if Hegel's idealist is the progress of history leading to some point, not the return of Christ and the fulfillment of all things, but just the becoming of the world spirit, progressing by means of this dialectic of some thesis, some idea clashing with some antithesis, producing some new synthesis. It was a very interesting trope, but Marx then says, yeah, that's right, except it's all material and it's all class strife and everything. So that this helps us to understand all those kind of Marxist underpinnings that are in our culture, and seeing lots of different things as expressions of structures that are underneath the surface, right? Whether they be economic or racial or gender or whatever. Power struggles, it seems to be the play with Marx. And then Trueman uses Freud's influence to talk about the subconscious and the sexual drive. And so then those inner feelings that seem to purify with Rousseau and the Romantics now could be bad, right? And Trueman tips his hat to Freud, saying, his purpose was to heal people, to have them talk through desires that were disordered so that they wouldn't act on them, right? And they could put them aside. So where we get with Nietzsche and post-Marx in Trueman's narrative is that you don't really want that kind of healing. You don't want to talk something through. You want to act it out, right? And furthermore, you want to win the culture over to approving of your acting out, whatever this desire is, and even if in reality it's destructive. So again, you come back to that dialogue of, you go back to the ethics, and now you're talking about why does virtue lie in the intermediate, in the mean? And the boys will discuss, because it preserves. The extremes destroy the thing. Not enough exercise destroys the thing. Too much tears the muscle, right? But the intermediate, which varies depending on where you are in your training, right, in terms of exercise, it preserves and allows the thing to do its work well, as a muscle or a person or whatever. So they get to see these kind of where do the rules come from, if some of the modern thinkers are having us say they come from tyranny, they come from an incompetent authority who's put over us, as opposed to they come from within, right, from a very competent authority who's the author of the universe.
Yeah. So, right. And so like that question of like authority, where does it lie? How does it relate to the self? It seems like one of the lines I was hunting for, something you mentioned reminded me of it, but is this the idea that there are so many ways in which we have all of us, even those of us that maybe are, think of ourselves as more religiously inclined than whatever else, there are ways that we've all been shaped by these thinkers, oftentimes subconsciously. And so again, what a gift to actually spend some time with these folks. But you've teed up beautifully kind of the other question of, we go the turn inwards towards the self, and then, all right, what do I do with the desires of this self, asks a Nietzsche, and how do those relate to the whole political order, would ask a Marx. How have these ideas, how does Trueman then kind of trace them forward into the cultural, the current moment that we're in? And I think of kind of these really broad, interesting terms like social imaginary and the individualism that he talks about. How does what are some of the language, some of the concepts that Trueman offers our students as he's bringing this notion of the self into the modern world?
Sure. So Trueman is borrowing, partly at least, on this idea of the social imaginary and expressive individualism from a Canadian philosopher named Charles Taylor. And the idea is that somebody growing up in this particular time in history, or in any other particular time in history, there is a particular set of cultural conditions that influences the way that one approaches reality. So this sum total of all of these cultural images, common images that we have, patterns of language use, this is all the social imaginary. And the current social imaginary, according to Trueman, according to Taylor, has been highly influenced by this idea of expressive individualism. So, Austin was mentioning Descartes highlighting a shift inward, so an inward-looking shift, and then Rousseau and the Romantic movement further saying that what we find inside the self is good and should be expressed. These are kind of some of the seminal ideas behind this expressive individualism, which is, I like to think of it in terms of a cult of authenticity. Like, in order to be authentic to myself, I have to act outwardly in a way that's in accord with my inner intuitions and feelings. And that these inner intuitions and feelings are normative in some way. And so if I get in touch with this interiority, then I have done something which needs to be expressed for the world. That's kind of the idea of expressive individualism that they highlight.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even there, I was going to comment that, again, one of the ways that I think all of us have been affected in some respects by this type of language and these thoughts is that there's so many different contexts in which this notion of authenticity is seen as like a virtue. Like even if you're following the Ten Commandments and whatever else, it is good to be perceived as like an authentic person. But I wonder sometimes if the guys have fully thought that through. Like, it seems like they would probably want their teachers to be inauthentic, in air quotes, if they show up to class one day feeling really grumpy and like they want to fail the students and make them do all a bunch of push-ups. Like sometimes there is a tension between who I am. There's a gap, as our friend Bishop Barton says. There's a gap between who I am or who I'm feeling and the person I'm supposed to be. I wonder if that's something this book helps with.
I completely agree, and I think Trueman would agree as well. That the inner self is not always the best guide for how we should act. As Christians, the ideal is Christ, and it's really getting in touch with the person of Christ and conforming our lives to Him that is going to lead to fulfillment and happiness. And to cut God out of the picture and to look exclusively inwardly at one's own interiority, maybe, Rousseauian sense, to see nature as in sync with that interiority. I mean, there's some truth there, but at the same time, a lot of problematic things follow. And when we trace out the rest of this narrative through, Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, one of the things about this whole story is that it really does kind of end up showing that there is a dark side to one's interiority. And that is something that I don't think Rousseau recognized, and something that's important for us to keep in mind as we try to, integrate what's positive about modern thought into this wonderful tradition of wisdom that we've inherited and that the guys are really delving into in the first half of their History of Western Thought course.
It's awesome. Yeah, and Trueman also brings in some interesting, just other interesting threads. Like he talks a little bit about music in the sense that back in the day, before the world was quote unquote plastic and totally malleable, listening to music was typically, you'd hear it performed and it was a community event. You think of the Irish session or something at a pub or whatever else. Every culture has its corollary. Now, oftentimes it is what it is, but we have earbuds in and we're just like on our own in our room, listen to our own thing by ourselves. So he has lots of examples like that of ways that these thinkers, or just the evolution of technology, has changed our experience of the world. He's got some great stuff on Oscar Wilde and just some of the interesting quotes, just using Oscar Wilde's own language about the experience of the artist, how the artist really doesn't have to worry about what people think or see or perceive. It's all about the artist's expression of his own experience, I suppose. Austin, I know you've got just a wonderful background in the arts, literature and drama and all sorts of beautiful things. But as you're talking about these ideas with the boys, do the things that Trueman says, or maybe the way he says them, does it resonate with the guys as they're kind of looking at the world that they themselves are experiencing? Like whatever, Kanye and all the things that Spotify and whatever. When he's describing things, does this kind of help them understand, and does it resonate with them?
Yeah, I think his examples they're very contemporary. It's 2022 book. It's always dangerous to be contemporary with the very young because 2022 is a long time ago.
Yeah, that's right.
But so it could become dated. But I think that I'm a huge fan of the dialogue, right? So the Platonic dialogue. And when we get to Aristotle, I think everybody's going to kind of be like, oh, we don't get to dialogue. But there are students who prefer Aristotle, right? And so some of them I'm related to. And they like the clarity, they like the directness, and you're not pivoting all the time with who's speaking and where are we in the dialogue, as you are with Plato. And Trueman presents it that way. It's more of an Aristotelian, I'm just giving this to you in a straightforward, organized way. And so I think the boys really appreciate that, right? He's got a perspective. He identifies it from the beginning, right? He's writing from a Judeo-Christian Western perspective on what's going on here, and then presents things as he sees them. So the guys, apart from the examples that he uses where he does mention iPods and things that are going on that are just in the last few years in the news, he's also done that. He's been very candid and straightforward. So they appreciate both of those things, I think. I did want to follow up. One of the
please.
Another aspect that the boys appreciate in the class in general, but also in, I think, what the work that Trueman has done, is the indirect way in which it comments on friendship. Is friendship possible? This turn to the self. One of the provisional code of morals for Descartes, when you're practicing his method or just donating to his research institute, if that's more your spiel. One of the provisional codes of morals is to fit in with this society. Just don't stand out, so that you can weigh everything in your mind and examine, this radical doubt that you're not going to take anything as true until you know for certain. But don't live in a way that people can see that that's what you're doing. And as the boys have come out of the ethics talking about friendship, or the confessions thinking about friendship with God, or these different ideas, Thomas Aquinas, right? What's going on with friendship here? Another essay we often read is Plutarch's How to Tell a Friend from a Flatterer, which maybe the title is How to Be a Friend Instead of a Flatterer. But the deception of others, the hiding what I'm doing because I'm still working on this interior project that Descartes just kind of seems to present as necessary if you're really going to examine things all the way down to the roots, is an impediment to friendship. And if you're never able to remove that, if you never reach certainty, then do you ever reveal who you are to the others, to your spouse, to even the dark parts of yourself? And part of apologizing is doing that. Like, that was wrong. I felt like hurting you. I wanted to be right. Like what you did made me mad, and I was proud, and I wanted to hurt your feelings, so I said that. So there's a sense of sincerity where I think, as Michael was saying, there's these nuggets of truth in even a problematic thinker, where there are other podcasts, I'm sure, about green time over screen time, right? You got to get on a nature hike. This is the roots of good science is just observing nature. And so there's something to what the Romantics are saying, something to what Rousseau is saying. But yeah, then teasing out, all right, as training in wisdom or prudence dictates, teasing out to what extent it's true, right? I think that those things become practical questions of friendship, and how am I going to live friendship with others and sincerity with others. And the great images from Plutarch's essay about the flatterer is the counterfeit. It's the counterfeit coin. It looks like the real deal, but when it's time to pay, you can't buy anything with the counterfeit coin. But you were fooled. The clerk that you're trying to purchase that with, he's not fooled, but you were fooled. So how do I know this friend is really reliable, right? And some sense of I've lost, and they stuck with me, right? That's probably a sign that they're a true friend. When fortune's fickle, the faithful friend is found, is how one of the translators gives us the line from Cicero's De Amicitia. But so that interior turn with Descartes, sometimes we lose friendship, or if everything's determined by economic status, right? And if everything is interior, or if everything is sexual, then what happens to friendship? It seems like and it's not a kind of consequentialist argument, I think, where, well, I don't want it to be true that friendship's impossible, so I'm going to deny the premise that would lead to that, right? But it's the encounter with reality, right? Physical reality, but also, no, there are people that I can trust who are flawed and apologize or need to at times, but they're trustworthy people. It's a fact. I can find them, even if there are others who I can't rely on that one. Or maybe right now I'm not reliable myself. I've got to admit that about myself. But they exist. There are truth tellers out there. So that I think is something where the whole class resonates with them, because they're not speaking about their particular friendships, which are still very young, right? And some of them last to the grave, and others, they'll kind of lose touch and then reconnect, and wish each other well all the time, but they won't be each other's deepest confidants. But they get to think about the friend they want to be and whether friendship is possible as they go through this class, and this book helps them do that.
Yeah, and just along those lines, I think I really appreciate that perspective, Austin. I can hear the perspective of a wise teacher who's explaining a little bit about how this is received by the boys. And it's important to keep in mind that the modern thought that we're trying to cover with them, this is in the context of a course that has begun all the way with ancient wisdom and is actually ending with a Platonic dialogue, as Austin mentioned as well. And also in the context of a curriculum that is giving them a very rich exposure to a significant sampling of the tradition that we've inherited. So the students are seeing this very much in that context and in receiving it as in dialogue with those other elements of our curriculum.
Was it a challenge for you guys as you're designing the class or even thinking about whether or not to have it, to even bring these names into our classrooms?
It was a real challenge because one of the things you notice is, like, if you're going to give the students some actual selections from Kant or Hegel to read, it's going to be very difficult. They are not easy to penetrate. It's hard to understand what they're talking about. Marx is a little bit more straightforward. The Communist Manifesto, Austin mentioned that that's something that's very, very accessible. But a lot of these thinkers are difficult, and if we're going to be true to the primary source approach of our course, we're not really going to be able to do justice to modern thought in the short amount of time that we have. And so this, as I liked what Austin said, this is very much the one work which is, in a sense, an exception, although I appreciate the comment. It's kind of like an Aristotelian exception to our principle of only using primary source documents. So I think it's added quite a bit to the history of Western thought class, the Carl Trueman book, and I'm grateful for him, for Ryan Anderson, for encouraging him to write a shorter book, which would be appropriate and accessible for our second semester seniors, and for having this edition.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah. And again, this book is written, it's kind of, a lot of different ages listening to this podcast and carpool and everything. So it is written very much within the context of certain modern ideologies that have received a lot of political attention recently. So it doesn't take too much imagination to figure out what that is. But I do think that the book has so much value, even outside of these particular contexts. As you're looking out at the world and you see the modern emphasis on the self, and then how that self can be politicized, what the impact of that is on community, a tendency towards individualism or whatever else. I mean, there's so many ways that those first 5 chapters in particular, as you mentioned, Austin, are helpful in a variety of contexts. So really important thinkers for our students to be aware of, I think, before they head to the next level. And but introduced to them after such a rich study of other realities, as you pointed out.
So I was just going to say, in that wider audience, it's if it's a book that you're going to put in the hands of your senior in high school, right outside of the Heights, it's a book to dialogue with them about. It's a book to read with them, and then to talk it through, because there's and even to be ahead, right? Because there are certain parts where you may say, I don't know that my particular child needs that particular chapter.
Yes.
But that dialogue, just to see what it is that the child has taken in, but by listening to see how they think, and then to help them shape and put things in the right context. So it's a very useful tool, but it's definitely not a read this and you'll be fine. Yeah.
No. It is
not that you were saying that.
We're not recommending that everyone go out and buy this book and give it to their high school senior immediately.
No,
right
definitely not. Yeah, no. So I'm so happy that y'all mentioned that, and I mean the discussion questions to that point are actually really, really interesting. And kind of touch on things that are personal to us. They ask questions about how we see how I see the world in light of these things. Do I see any of these things in myself? And it's very helpful. But that Socratic dialogue is going to be important. And this is absolutely a step into the deep end, the very deep end of the cultural swimming pool. And so it's not one to be taken without a good lifeguard to walk with the kiddos. So thank you for that. Thank you for teaching the book, the ideas, the curriculum, the whole deal, for everything that's coming this 2025-26 academic year. My thanks to you both, Mr. Austin Hatch, Mr. Michael Moynihan. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Michael.
And thank you for listening. To support the work of Mr. Hatch and Mr. Moynihan, all they do here on campus and beyond the walls of campus through this podcast, please do visit heightsforum.org. Click on support. Everything you do is incredibly appreciated while you're there. You can also learn more about the upcoming Convivium Conference in November of 2025. This is a conference for teaching men, so it should be a really, really great time. All sorts of opportunities for financial aid, free lodging, all sorts of great things. So if you'd like to come and spend some time here in DC, visit heightsforum.org. We'd love to host you here on campus for a couple of days of thought, reflection, fraternity, conversations like the one we've just had. Should be a great time. So learn more again, heightsforum.org. My thanks to the entire Forum team for making this podcast possible. Thanks to you for listening. We'll talk to you next week.